Hey guys, it's Daniel here to talk about one of the first sort of notable films of 2026, and that is Mercy, the new sci-fi film starring Chris Pratt and Rebecca Ferguson. This film imagines like a near future reality where AI is used as the sole judge, jury, and executioner of serious crimes. In this so-called like mercy court, the accused are presumed guilty and have 1.5 hours to use the extensive AI capacities of the courts to prove their innocence. It's an intriguing idea, but I think the film itself has like a similarly daunting task to prove itself to some audiences, I think myself included, that probably began with the assumption that this is merely a derivative film reminiscent of like Steven Spielberg's Minority Report and I think plenty of other movies that was like unceremoniously dumped into the undesirable January movie season for a reason. Is it guilty as charged, or will it manage to win over skeptical audiences? I think the answer to that question is yes. And what I mean by that is I think whether you have a positive or a negative response to this film will depend a lot just on expectations, because to me Mercy feels like a film better suited and I think more likely to be like positively or like uncritically received as a straight to streaming movie. And I think the fact that this was produced by Amazon makes its like theatrical release even more surprising. But with these modest expectations, I actually enjoyed this film more than I think I expected to. Is it a great film? No. Is it even like a good film? I think that's debatable, and I think arguably less so the longer you think about it. But I do think it is an enjoyable film with enough, I think, creative storytelling ideas and like narrative intrigue that it at least kept me interested for the duration of its relatively short runtime. I think this is the sort of film that I think will almost inevitably be like panned by critics, only to become like a breakout hit on streaming platforms several months from now. And the defining, and I think like the divisive selling point of Mercy, is its very unique storytelling approach. The film's gimmick is that Chris Pratt, who plays a man accused of murdering his wife, spends basically the entire film stationary in a chair, and with the assistance of an AI judge, who is played by Rebecca Ferguson, must solve the case and like prove his innocence in a trial that unfolds in real time. And I will say, just in general, I am a big fan of these sorts of like isolated and contained stories. Although I also admit that at times, watching Chris Pratt read a series of on-screen text messages has all the thrills of watching someone read a series of text messages, which is to say, not a whole lot. But I do think at other times, the film does manage to find ways to kind of more effectively utilize its concept. And for as much as like the marketing material, at least to me, made it appear like this is just going to be some sort of like watered down Minority Report, I think the found footage element of this does allow Mercy to feel, I think, it's a lot more like original and distinctive. It's obviously not like the first film to use this sort of unconventional storytelling approach, but it may be, I think, among like the highest profile and honestly, arguably among the best. Now, how you feel about that central gimmick, I think will make or break this film for you, because really there isn't a whole lot else to sink your teeth into. Obviously, Chris Pratt and Rebecca Ferguson are both A-list performers, but I think they struggle to like transcend the limitations of their roles, because Pratt is basically strapped to a chair for 95% of the runtime and is a sort of like against type character as a dour like deadbeat alcoholic. And let's be honest, does anyone really want to see a dour deadbeat Chris Pratt? Meanwhile, Ferguson is a sort of floating head avatar of an emotionless AI who spends most of her screen time just giving menacing glares to Pratt. And I actually think both of them do about as well as you could be expected, given their roles, but just don't expect to find a whole lot of like emotional stakes or like character growth. And these types of like found footage films always require, I think, a hefty suspension of disbelief. And like the harder you think about the specifics of the actual plot of Mercy, the messier and like more nonsensical it becomes, because there are plenty of this conveniences and plot holes, and I think even several moments that seem to directly contradict plot elements that were established only like several scenes earlier. But again, I think expectations matter, and I think if you go into this looking to evaluate and like judge the plausibility of the story, then you will find plenty to make you shake your head. But if you just shut off your brain and kind of simply go along for the ride, ignoring how incoherent that ride is at times, then I do think you will find more enjoyment and less frustration. Thematically, Mercy touches on several hot button debates about AI's potential for human flourishing or human destruction, as well as themes of justice and like government overreach, but it doesn't really seem to have much to contribute to those conversations. And you know what? that's fine, since I don't really need a quirky sci-fi film in January to deeply challenge my philosophical beliefs on crucial existential questions. But I do think the lack of this thematic depth does leave Mercy feeling a bit like a bowl of stale, plain potato chips, just lacking the flavor to justify the consumption of such empty calories. As far as language, there is a surprisingly high amount of profanity, including one unnecessary F-bomb, some maybe 20 to 30 other kind of minor cuss words, as well as just some general crude language, as well as several uses of God or JC. For violence, really not a whole lot going on here. There is a dead and bloodied body that is shown at the crime site, including some close-up digital reconstructions of how the murder weapon, which in this movie is a knife, kind of penetrated the body. And for sexuality, really nothing here either. There is a major plot point that revolves around extramarital affair, although the actual sexual encounters are never shown on screen. You also have a young man who conducts a video call while in the bathtub, although he's only visible from the chest up. As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface, obviously, as we all know, the current and future impact of AI is arguably the one, number one hot button issue right now. I think a lot of other recent movies have wrestled with the theme, with the prevailing conclusion being that AI is not, in fact, our friend. And Mercy, as a film, is not necessarily an enthusiastic embrace of AI, but I think neither is it just a rejection of it. The concept of an AI-run mercy court is, I think, framed with appropriate horror and criticism, and the countless menacing glares of Rebecca Ferguson, her avatar, seems clearly designed to just hammer home the dehumanization of AI. At the same time, whereas many other AI-centric films take the form of a dire dystopian warning, Mercy is much more measured. And in one scene, Chris Pratt's character challenges the AI that she, to paraphrase, sees the world in black and white of right and wrong, but humans know that the truth always rests in the mushy gray area between those two. Now, setting aside the possible biblical and theological issues with that statement, in the actual context, the intention is not to deny the reality of absolute truth or morality, but just to affirm that the emotional capacity of humans does transcend any sort of simple kind of algorithmic assessment. Where the same kind of emotional capacity that can lead to a violent crime of passion can also lead to just an intuitive hunch that discovers truth that a cold, detached, inhuman AI simply cannot understand. And the film ends with a character stating that they are all doing what we're programmed for. Human, AI, we all make mistakes and lie. And kind of the implication seems to be that both humans and AI have the capacity for good and for evil, for discovering truth and also making critical mistakes. And in that way, Mercy doesn't really take a firm stance on the issue of AI beyond just acknowledging the messiness of the issue. I think it suggests that the real problem is not AI, but just a lack of moderation and an over-reliance on such technologies, and that AI can be a helpful tool as long as we don't lose sight of our God-created humanity. In the end, I think for better or for worse, Mercy is probably exactly the type of movie you might expect it to be. I think it is a really creative film, although not always an overly clever one. It occasionally, I think, bumps up against its full potential as a gripping and innovative film, but ultimately falls short of those heights, and I think lands firmly in the territory. It's just a neat idea that could have been better and is ultimately forgettable. Even so, like that earlier mentioned bowl of potato chips, I think sometimes we eat for nutrition, and other times we're simply bored and want something to munch on. And so I actually liked this movie, at least for what it was, but perhaps I was just in the mood to munch. But hey, I would love to hear what you guys think. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of other choices here in January, so if you do go check out this movie, don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation on it. If you haven't done so too, I encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.